This is a special meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. It's Monday, January 24th. On our agenda is a study session. We're still discussing the draft of the comprehensive plan downtown. And if we could have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Bockenstedt.
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Coronato. Commissioner Iturreria.
Here.
Commissioner Lupicki.
Here.
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Ranville.
Here.
Commissioner Samuelson.
Here.
Commissioner Stavropoulus.
All right, thank you. We do have a quorum. In front of us, we have a draft agenda, 7 items.
Oh, maybe not. It should be distributed.
In front of us, we are about to have.
Yes, well, we've got already a revised, so we will examine that closely, and I will entertain discussions about changes. All right. Still 7 items.
Let's just drop the first 6 and then go right to the 7.
Go to adjournment.
I heard that earlier.
I'll second that. Second
See,
that.
there you go. See, we're ready.
Motion to adjourn.
We got a full.
Yes,
full house.
and the other 2 commissioners have arrived, so we do have everyone here. All right. If there is any serious discussion about what's on the agenda, otherwise we'll go to approach to sustainability. I believe Commissioner Ranville and Stavropoulus have done some work and perhaps have a presentation, some items for discussion anyway, maybe, associated with this.
I have copies of Jenny's. Pavlos, I couldn't find yours today. So if you have a copy of it, I'll go make copies. So
They
everybody has
were,
yours.
what she sent included both.
Oh, good. Okay,
Yes.
great. Okay, fantastic.
So we have a handout. I'll just mention while this is being passed around that this would be available to citizens if you want to see what we're discussing. It obviously is recently put in front of us. One of the discussions we've had is about sustainability goals and sort of the scope of it in the comprehensive plan, not only downtown for the city. Some of it will translate to the citywide plan, I'm sure. We want to remember that we're looking at the comprehensive plan from a high level. 30,000 feet seems to be the most mentioned level. So that indicates we're not about to land this anytime soon. All right. That said, does one of you want to start in on this?
Sure, I'll start. Jenny and I met and discussed some different things. I want to give a little bit of a background because then we met with Dennis and Sarah Jane on the phone, and it was kind of my understanding too that they'll work on it a little bit, get it back to us, continue to work on it. So this is not by any means final, and actually we're looking at most likely we'll have something more definitive to put in at the next meeting. But since we are on the agenda, I think we can take a little bit of time and explain the intent, but probably take considerably less time this meeting and maybe postpone a deeper discussion. So, and what you have here is integrated notes that Jenny did, and actually some notes that I had done and Jenny integrated into this. So it's one piece. Do you want to go in and explain
Sure.
them since you did?
Okay. And we were looking at just a very simple sustainability definition that was fairly universal. That a sustainable Littleton community meets the needs of the present while enhancing the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But essentially, the idea is to leave Littleton better for the next generation. And I know that may, we're still wordsmithing some of the definition, but just something very simple that we want to make Littleton better. We think Littleton is great in what we have today, but what can we do to, for the next generation to hand it off. And the things that we wanted to start with sustainability is we wanted to really start with our city document of Littleton, the environmental action plan, and build from that. And so that we're not starting from scratch at all. We're really starting from what the city of Littleton has already begun. But the environmental action plan is an internal department document. So the goals are really focused on what the internal departments here at the city offices in the city building and what they can do. But what we thought was that we would start with their categories, their key sustainability target areas, and we would start with their 5 categories because we thought they were really good and could apply for our comp plan and then for expanding it citywide. And the 5 areas are energy conservation, waste reduction, water conservation, air quality improvement, and then leadership, education, communication, and citizen programs. And we began to expand that into our comprehensive plan, since we've been talking about additional sections that we've been focusing on that with our, and so you'll see how we've stuck with the 5 goals, began with that. Then we went into historic preservation. And it's interesting that in the sustainability, this environmental action plan, the city of Littleton, while it's not in their top 5 category areas, historic preservation is certainly highlighted. They actually have a whole page about historic preservation in this document. And so we also, in our comprehensive plan, talked about historic preservation as our section. And the other thing we began to look at is pulling in green building as part of historic preservation for just this sustainability goals. Not that that would be the section. We're not trying to change any section headings, but to think about green building in connection with historic preservation for adaptive reuse, that they're not conflicting, and that sometimes people think you've got to start from scratch to do green building, and by no means. There's so much you can do with existing buildings to make them more energy efficient, but as well as using local materials and just green materials. So there's other components in there that we thought we'd like to try to put in conjunction with historic preservation. Then we have our categories. We've been talking about land use and urban design, circulation, economic development, parks, trails, and open space. And then we thought food and social were 2 components that we hadn't talked about as categories specifically for sustainability. And since food is becoming, as I've been hearing from when I went to the Dr. Cog Planning Commission meeting, or not Planning Commission meeting, it was a Planning Commission, basically it was kind of giving planning commissioners an overview of some things that are going on in the Denver metropolitan area. And food was one thing that was brought up, and the National League of Cities, they were bringing up food in that it's something that we need to be thinking more about as far as local and access and being able to get healthy food available. So that's one thing, and also the social, because as all the sustainability areas is great, but if we're not getting that social interaction occurring, that's a piece that we want to make sure we want to also think about as well. So those are the categories we were looking at. By no means does that have to be, but we wanted to stick with what the city has already come up with, and we want to support that with the environmental action plan. And I can pass this around if you want to look at this. And our sections that we've been already talking about, just to make sure we've integrated sustainability. I think that's one of the things Pavlos and I have been wanting to just double check that we've got ourselves covered, and then adding a couple additional that we think haven't been highlighted. So
at this point, the intent and what you have in front of you is to be broader, to some extent kind of starting with putting everything down and then beginning to narrow it down, not you have a lot more there than the sustainability section would be. And most likely some of the discussions that we've had is that the food and social, and definitely the social can tie into public space and to open space and parks in terms of encouraging community gardens, land use and urban design, circulation, economic development, and of course the parks, trails, open and public space are already sections within the comp plan, so we would incorporate some things in them rather than them in. And the sustainability section would cover specifically the energy conservation, waste reduction, water conservation, air quality. And again, on the historic preservation and green building, is not that the two are identical, but we wanted to be able to address them in the same section, because sometimes they are perceived as being almost contrary to each other. And there can be sometimes a conflict. The building that you're trying to preserve its historical character may not look so good if you fill it up with photovoltaic panels. But instead of it being a conflict, I think it's a creative tension that we can address and recognize we're doing. And in many respects, I think we're looking at it as not this being something that Littleton is going to do different, but enhancing and continuing what has been done, and in some ways returning back to doing the practices that were quite common in the Littleton of a few decades ago or several decades ago. So. And beginning to integrate a lot of the things that we're talking about. So, and also on the sustainability definition, what I wanted to add is basically a slight rewarding of the fairly universal sustainable development definition that has been used, and it's the Buntestant Commission, I think, and actually it's Dave is the one that you brought in and read, not last session, but 2 sessions ago. He came in and read the standard. So this is based upon that. And really the emphasis is to say, how do we take a community that was passed over to us, and how do we make it better for passing it on to our children and our grandchildren?
I really appreciate Jenny and Pavlos doing all this. It's a lot of work. And the challenge that we've talked about, both here and also when we met with Jenny and Pavlos, was just, we know that a lot of this is really citywide, a lot of this is region-wide, and yet we want to at the same time acknowledge, the issues this first small area plan that we're doing, the downtown plan, and so how do we incorporate what seems to be most appropriate here, and then all at the same time not lose these other ideas as we go farther into comprehensive plan, kind of citywide. So it's that challenge in terms of doing these things. So this is really helpful, I think, in terms of getting the issues that we can then say, okay, where do we fit it, and make sure that doing both those things, that we're really dealing with the small area plan at the same time kind of having this other kind of bin out here for what we're going to put into the citywide plan too. So it's very helpful to have all this for discussion. So.
And the plan at this point is, of course, any initial feedback or input or suggestions that the other commissions want to bring in, but is for Dennis and for Sarah Jane to take this work it into something that they feel is compatible with the comp plan, get it back to Jenny and myself for us to review it and make sure that everything is, and then have at the next meeting of the Planning Commission as complete and as quote-unquote final language as we can for review by the Commission, so that we are having an actual discussion on what we're proposing to put in there. I don't mean final in the sense that we will have decided, but what we wanted to avoid is a long, extended, potentially esoteric discussion on what is or isn't sustainability, and try to come up with something concrete that builds upon what the city's done so far, is appropriate for the downtown area, but can also be used as a base for the comp plan, for the citywide comp plan, and for other areas as we move forward.
And some of the, just underneath, we were trying to keep the goals fairly simple. And, I mean, some of the implementation, these are brainstorm ideas. So that just things that some of the things we've been talking about, like with the lighting, and then just some other ideas as well and also like some of the community gardens. And so there's certain components we've been talking about that we wanted to just kind of list, and then some other things we've been brainstorming on. So it's really a working document.
And I think what Pavlos said too is some of this fits into existing sections that we've got, so it's kind of a checklist for us to make sure we've got it covered. Some things that we don't have covered, other things we go in the sustainability chapter itself. So,
Let me interject. What we're passing around, the Environmental Action Plan, is dated April 2009, and as Jenny stated, I think the first 5 categories come from this. This is probably available on the
online.
On the internet.
Website.
So it is available to anyone who wants to look. It was aimed really at the departments in the city, but a lot of the principles translate.
Absolutely, and I think that is the key to it. That it's really the city's business in terms of what we do with our buildings and with our operations and how do we function. But I think it really does provide a good guideline in terms of here are key issues that we're looking at and what applies locally.
Linda.
I have an idea on how to incorporate some of these. Maybe you could put to the left of the bullet item, or however you want to do it, is like an S to delineate this is a sustainability item, and it also will it'll draw attention to those sustainable items, and it'll keep that in the forefront.
I was just glancing at the categories we had. I think that's a good suggestion. It looks like, in a lot of ways, what you've handed out can be integrated or already is, and maybe that just shows that we've addressed that. Maybe staff can go through and have that as part of the draft next time. I guess I'm interested, in about the next half an hour. What kind of feedback do you want, or what kind of feedback do the commissioners want to offer? Do you want to go through this item by item, or do you just want some general idea? We probably won't make it through the entire thing item by item. Is it adequate to have the commissioners just perhaps comment on something that comes to mind, something they've noticed?
At this point, I would really prefer that we don't go after item by item, because what you have here is sort of an initial brainstorm document. What we want to provide the Commission with is a document that's gone back and forth a couple times, at least between staff and us, that we bring in, and that's something that can go item by item. But this is bringing you up to speed on what on. We can discuss it a little bit further. I don't want to not have a conversation about it, but I also know we have a lot of other things that we need to go over. And one possibility is that commissioners have a chance to review it, and if there's any specific thing that they want to address or concern to incorporate in the actual draft to debate, is to send it over to Dennis, and it can be incorporated that way.
Yes, Sarah Jane and I started working on it, but what we really want to do is take this and kind of, like we've done with everything else, we really try and shorten it and summarize it, consolidate, what's here, and put it in sections and things that don't seem appropriate at this level, pull out into a bin perhaps for other things.
Can we get copies of this electronically?
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like it's available online.
It's available online by
process.
That's fine. If it's online, I'll just go. I just wanted to know if it was available.
It's available online on the website, and I think the link is right off the homepage.
It is, yeah, on the website there.
I underlined it so I would know what to look for.
Yeah.
Not having run across it before.
So the thrust of that is what the city staff, departments, et cetera, can do to advance those goals. And that's fairly easy, because the city manager says, you will do this, and it's going to get done.
Right.
How do we translate that into planning and zoning and building codes?
Right.
That really is what, just waving the flag saying, hey, we could do all this stuff, that makes us all feel good, doesn't accomplish anything. So how do we make that translation? Because that's a big jump from city-directed actions to what we're going to try and demand of or prohibit from existing property owners or new development.
And that is the challenge, and particularly since the plans are primarily land use plans, so it's kind of land use related issues. Some things are happening anyway. When we look at the new building codes and they come through, they're getting more and more sensitive to environmental issues and sustainability issues. But I think to some degree, having the plan kind of support that at that level in terms of building code, and it gets into site design, it gets into all kinds of things in terms of how do you actually develop the city, things that we do deal with through the comp plan. Then I think you really can get some direction. Other things are much more difficult in terms of educational issues and things that are buying green, buying appliances, all that kind of stuff, educational issues. And particularly at this level, it's really tough. So it's almost really general in terms of supporting and promoting those issues. But it's a challenge of how do we write that and how do we actually make that consistent with the goals of the plan. So I agree.
And that's the step that will be done, is being done, brought forward. One of the things that I want to clear is that I think we see this section more along the lines of the section on economic development, as opposed to, say, the section on land use and urban design, something that is more supportive and shows things. Within the comp plan, we're trying to promote certain things, but there are some limitations in terms of what can be done via zoning, via the design guidelines and others. So there are some sections there that can be very kind of traditional within zoning, and there are some sections we agreed to put in a section on economic development because we felt that this is something important and the comp plan affects and is affected by economic development. And it's along those lines that I think that to view the sustainability section, not along lines of beginning to say requiring that every new development has to be LEED certified or anything like that. And we're still working at some of the details on how we would go about doing that, and what we would propose in the next session, I think we'll be able to sit there and really debate.
Sure, Jane.
I think, Dave, your concerns are something that we've talked about, and a lot of what you see here, while it may be a good idea, I'm not sure it's going to necessarily specifically end up in the document. The one thing that we did talk about was maybe with green buildings and those kinds of things, we could have, okay, let me back up. There's not a lot of incentives that we have to give away, and even if we had to give them away, we may not want to give them away. But you could do things like, instead of having a LEED certified building, let's say, which has its own issues, you could have a Littleton Green certified building, which would be, a program where if the developer of that building or redeveloper of that building could prove that they had used a certain amount, similar to the LEED, but more Colorado specific, then they might, there might be, they might get a certificate, they might be on a list, there might be a ceremony, there might be something like that, which I know is not a huge thing, but for people who are trying to market their buildings, they have used LEED extensively, and we're hoping that maybe they could use a program like that too, which wouldn't be terribly costly, but it would kind of highlight sustainability. So
Yeah, I think
that's the one that we have come up with.
Yeah. And it may be a combination because of that. It may be a combination of where we can be specific and where is consistent with the comp plan, we can be specific. In other cases, it may be just raising the awareness. Yeah, that when we do these things, this is an issue for us that we need to be thinking about. And here are all the ways to look at it. So it's an awareness, I think, that this is important to the city. And it certainly has played out for Littleton in the past few years in terms of incentives for solar energy, that type of thing that people give incentives for. So the city's been active in that, again, and just saying, yes, we're supportive of that, and we think that that should continue. That type of thing may be important.
Other comments, commissioners? Seems like maybe like we have done with the drafts we've had before, forward your comments to Dennis, and they'll do some editing. All the way down the line, we've wanted to reduce the scope of it, and so I think a lot of this is already stated, and I liked, personally, I'll probably forget to forward my comment, but I like Linda's suggestion of maybe what I'll try to do is put these items that you guys developed. I grabbed my draft, our last draft from the downtown neighborhood, and just go through and mark it up as, you know, okay, an S here would be appropriate. I don't know if that's exactly right. Maybe I don't know. It's not a bad idea. So, commissioners.
Yeah, I just
Great.
have one comment. Thanks for putting this together. It's a very good compilation, I think. I have some specific comments that I'll get back to Dennis, but one of the thoughts I had was, could this become sort of a separate document from the downtown area plan, the small area plan, that is intended to address citywide issues and sort of serves now as a touchstone, or, you know, something that we can reference by way of an S, or maybe there's a little green leaf next to the things, or, you know, we do a lot of things, but that it is somewhat of a living document, pun intended, that as additional areas are reviewed, it may be edited and updated and eventually becomes part of the comp plan with city council's review. You know, they may review it with the downtown area plan and accept it or move it on, push it forward. But it lives as a separate document.
And that was the intent. I mean, the discussion we had our last meeting, I know you're out of town, but it was that this belongs more as a citywide document than belongs as just downtown only, and I think it's without recognition. But since we're not working on the citywide section of the comp plan, just of the downtown, we felt that we could go ahead and put it in, write it specific to downtown, but it's very much as something that is more of a citywide implementation, and continue to adjust it when we do work on the citywide section of the comp plan. I'd love to see it incorporated. But right now, that's the instrument we've got, and that's the document in. Downtown also gives us a really interesting area to work with because it contains it has such a strong presence by city government. There's such a public area, as you've brought in, with a lot of things. So in that, you know, where to talk about sustainability in an area or in a neighborhood that is predominantly residential, there's not a lot of neighborhood, not a lot of redevelopment and others, that wouldn't be so appropriate. But in an area where there is the potential for the city to take an active lead role, it's a good place to start out with it. But yeah, mostly it is something that needs to be viewed as a citywide commitment. And some of the things that we talked about in terms of how it can work is not so much of what do we require, what do we prohibit, but more of what could the city pilot. You know, are the things that the city could pilot as a project? What are things, efforts that the city could coordinate? Like the possibility, and it's been discussed sometimes, of when we talk about water conservation or waste reduction. Those are things that the city could coordinate. Much the same way that we've talked about parking. Is parking something, the downtown area, something that we want to address on a developer-by-developer basis? Or do we want it to be addressed by something that the city coordinates with participation from private interest? Recognizing good efforts, like Sarah Jane said, you know, are there ways in which we can recognize efforts and of course educate and promote and raise awareness for people and put it out there like we did with economic development and say this is something that is really important to us and we want people to consider it. In many respects, for me, remember many of us who joined the commission at the same time 3 years ago. I remember then Director of Community Development, Mary Robertson, saying that zoning is the absolute worst that you want to permit happening, right? You know, that something that's done to zoning is just sort of, it's the lowest common denominator. You don't want things to get any worse than that. I've always envisioned comp plan as being kind of the aspiration. This is what we want to see. But we recognize that it's not something that we can force. We can't make it. But it is a document where we can go out to citizens, council, developers, staff, and say, this is what we'd like to see. So if you're coming in with a proposal, this is what we want to see happening. And sustainability falls within that area.
I think this is a nice-sized document to review, too. My comments before of not remembering to do anything, it makes it easy to do. So we'll look forward, and perhaps I hope the revisions, the editing that you guys do, and you can get to us, Wednesday or Thursday, preceding the meeting, and then we'll further this discussion, especially if we can end this portion 20 minutes early now.
Quick question, sir.
Oh, I'm not there yet.
Is there any chance that we can get sustainability, this paper, emailed to us, so that if we had comments, we could?
I could, absolutely.
Can you do that?
You bet. Yeah. They
So
sent it
that
to
we
me,
can turn it around quicker and,
Mm-hmm.
because I've been taking notes, but it'd be kind of nice just to type it up and give it to you.
You bet.
For those of
Thank
you
you.
who can actually get something to open and add comments to it electronically. Okay. It would be faster for me to chisel it. David.
I'm going to raise a couple of thoughts that I'd like people to take with them as they're going through this. Other than, I think it's premature to say we're editing or wordsmithing this. I think we need to look at the basic concept. This is wholly new. First exception or question I'm going to raise is the summary. Essentially, the idea is to leave Littleton better. I can think of a time not too many years ago when the group who was in charge of this thought they were leaving it better. I thought that better would have been wiping out all the old stuff and putting new stuff in. Better is a debatable word. It doesn't mean anything except for the person who's saying it. He's not conveying that to anybody else. The idea of sustainability is to keep options open. Okay, so you're not wiping out a resource, including historic buildings that may tell the people who, future generations, where we've come from and what it means to be a part of Littleton. It's keeping options open, not getting into a debate about what is or is not better. The other thing is, I'm seeing a lot in here about encourage and promote. And as I said 2 meetings ago, if we have specific actions connected to that, that might make some sense. If all we're saying is, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could all do, it ain't going to happen. A developer is not going to come in if he is not required to do something like that. Most of these things is not going to be in his interest to do. We're talking about the form and function of the community. These things are nice. They make everybody feel good. It's like the idea of having the separate little categories of parks and open space and circulation and sustainability. Yes, I keep hearing it said that we've segregated those as separate topics to show how important they are. You want to show how important they are, pull them together into a unified picture and how each one supports the other to make a particular area work. But pulling them off individually, that is not a nativity scene. It's individual elements that are being isolated to show how important they are. But it doesn't paint a picture. Okay, it's a joke, but that's the approach we're taking. We're isolating elements. We're not showing relationships. Every time we come to talk about something meaningful in terms of what we're going to do instead of talk about, we duck. We're talking about energy savings and sustainability. Every time somebody mentions solar rights, drop, step away from it. Don't talk about it because it's a tough issue. But if we're not going to talk about the tough issues, this is just a kumbaya moment, and it's not going to get us anyplace. So I'm asking that you go through this with that in mind. How is somebody who's not been with our discussion and seen the progression for 3 years, how are they going to react in terms of, well, what are they asking me to actually do, and how does it fit my goal for my property?
I think that brings it back, grounds it well, and I put at the side of this, how is this applicable to a developer? And I think that, in my mind, that is a way to go through this and analyze it. Because, you're right. That's part of what we started trying to do. I put it in terms of what is going to happen next to me. I want to know that as a property owner, whether commercial or, just my own private residence. And for the developer who comes in, what is going to be agreeable to the community? And that's our outreach has been to assess that so that there aren't missteps and so that developers don't waste their time and energy, and we make it clear. So, very good. How is this applicable to a developer? I think it's apropos. All right. So we'll devote more time to that. You guys get us a compilation of comments, and our next item 3, was questions for the Planning Commission. We've narrowed it down to, perhaps we have 5 more. I guess the second half of our last meeting, we plowed through a lot of them, and that's available on the web. These 5 from staff, I guess at first blush, this seems to be sort of a new 5. So Dennis or Sarah Jane, whoever wants to.
I'll start off, and Sarah Jane will take over part of the time, too. The first question is about the industrial district that we've been talking about. And we didn't really talk, I think, in terms of where are we going with this. Thank you. We didn't talk about this in terms of, I think everybody's comfortable with this, but we didn't do a couple things. We didn't say, what happens if this ever goes away, if the industrial use closes, what happens to that property, what's everybody want to see there. The other thing we didn't talk about, we didn't do a height cap for that in terms of what's appropriate. We did it for the rest of downtown, but we didn't do it for that. So those 2 things we really want to talk about. We had talked about in the draft, if this goes away at some point, if the owner says this is no longer viable, I want to look at other alternatives, that it should be looked at as the same as this area in here in terms of the residential mixed-use district with that kind of residential base to it, mixture of uses, for that same similar sense to it. So it be incorporated, so it be part of the whole. Is that what everybody thinks is appropriate? And what do we think in terms of height? And I did bring the height map along with me tonight, too, if you don't have one. So we can kind of talk about what we're looking at for other areas. Is this area maybe appropriate for a greater height? Is it you want to see the same type of height that we talked about in other areas? But what are we looking at for that area? So I'll pass out the height maps if you don't have them.
I think I need one. I've got some maps here. Here's one I can mark on for what ensues from our discussion.
You guys need some?
Wouldn't hurt. I guess for the city attorney, there was some agreement. Oh,
I don't know if I
there's something about the industrial area that Littleton needs to have an industrial area. Am I remembering correctly, that comes out of the decision to the Supreme Court regarding crystals, I think it was?
That's a totally different issue.
I don't know that crystals had to do with whether you had to have an industrial area. It was more, I think, initially the case. I mean, what went to the U.S. Supreme Court case had to do with a due process and speedy relief issue.
Okay.
Whether a 106 was actually speedy, adequate relief. But in general terms, you can limit the location, but you have to actually have that location. So in other words, you can't limit someone to industrial and then get rid of industrial, because then you're essentially just zoning them out. They have to have some alternative place to locate.
So a natural, I suppose, evolution, if you will, where a developer, the property owner, current or future, comes in and says, I'd like this rezoned. It's really not an issue what we say that it's allowable in the comprehensive plan that can be rezoned away, and the necessity of having that isn't going to override, or is that simply something someone else has to have an awareness of?
We just have to leave an option for them, right?
Yeah, so let me, are you saying eliminate industrial if you were to To completely eliminate industrial zones in Littleton?
Well, I'm asking,
No, this one.
There's this one.
this
yeah.
one.
If we were to say, we
No big
recommend
deal.
that if this use goes away, that it be some other zone district, it'd be CA, for
Yeah, it
example.
could be.
Yeah.
That would be fine.
Okay.
and are there other industrial areas in Littleton?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, actually,
oh, yeah.
very
There's
specifically,
plenty.
and I remember that because I had advocated that the point of the football north of Bellevue is included in the downtown area, and one of the reasons, and that is industrial, as is the area to the east of it, east of the railroad tracks. And the discussion that we had at the time was that no, we wanted to keep that area industrial, and because it was separated by the bridge, and that didn't seem to really fit. My understanding was whenever we talked about that little, the things called downtown north section over there, there wasn't any desire to keep that section industrial because we've already allocated the area north of Bellevue as remaining industrial, since we haven't called for that to change. So I think it would be perfectly appropriate to, and I would call for, we make a decision of what we would like to see in that industrial area, not as industrial. I think now that the area immediately north of it has been rezoned, it kind of sits there waiting for some change, and indicate it from now. Otherwise, if we don't define it, it will either stay industrial or someone is going to come in with a proposal and they'll say, the comp plan doesn't say anything about it. I think we do need to say something about it. And there's plenty of other areas, including really not that far away from that at all, already zoned industrial that can address those other uses that we can't just exclude.
Let me just go to the bigger point. However, we can't go neighborhood by neighborhood or area by area and include in the comprehensive plan a recommendation that each industrial neighborhood be rezoned, resulting in a net of none. That probably wouldn't fly at some point.
Well, you could probably put it in the comp plan if you actually did it. I mean, a comp plan is a guiding document, so I don't think it really gives anybody a right to sue under, a comp plan. It's when the rezoning application were to occur, if that actually, occurred, and the comp plan was the factor that was guiding the commission, then you could have rise to a claim. But I think in this particular area, if you want to encourage development of a different type in this area, you would be free to do that. You're still not taking away that property owner's right to continue to develop it as industrial if it meets zoning. You're just saying we encourage this type of development and sort of signaling to any future developer that were you to come in and rezone to X, that would be encouraged in the comp plan.
Thank you.
I think that where this comes from is exactly what you were talking about, Pavlos, that what we have so far is that we recognize that this industrial area is actually a pretty successful business area for downtown right now. It provides quite a bit of employment. But because it's surrounded by other uses, there could be a desire on the part of the owner of this parcel to change. So what we're trying to do is to anticipate that and say, if that changes, then we ought to be able to say what we want it to change to. And that's all we're putting in there. We're not suggesting that it's going to go away. We're not encouraging it to go away. At this point, you probably have enough land to absorb all the housing that's on the demand side. But we're just trying to anticipate it. And so it's not, we're not trying to push them out, I guess is my point.
We're talking here about if the owner, aren't there at least 3 separate parcels there? It isn't all just Regal Plastic. There are at least 2 other businesses in
There are
there.
other businesses. My impression is I think it's a single parcel, and those others are leased, I think, by the owners of Regal Plastic, I believe. I think it was all Regal Plastic originally, and I think they leased those out, but I could check on that to make sure, but I thought it was all single ownership.
The only thing I see, just as an observer of that particular site, in the near future, in the short term, I certainly think that we should say that, the current existing use is more than acceptable for the area and is compatible to the area. But, however, as time goes on and attitudes change, one of two things, in my opinion, could happen. One is that you could have government increase in that area, or you could have something similar to what happened with Alexon and that parcel as well. Either one would be, in my opinion, probably fine. Probably the better of the two. You don't want government because that's usually non-taxable, and you certainly want something taxable. So that's a priority there. I mean, if you just really the first comment is you want something that's good use, it's a good taxable issue. The other thing is it could become, like city of Littleton could expand there for all we know, if they wanted to, or we're in a position.
It just seems a little premature to sit there and say, oh, well, because the surrounding use is primarily residential. Well, I beg to differ. The Alexan property to the north is residential, but the property to the west, the property to the south, and the property to the east is not.
Well, currently, yeah.
Right. I mean, one of the principles we talked about very early on that doesn't raise its ugly head very often is very right, adjacencies and transition and buffering and that sort of thing. And I think that's still one of our driving principles, no matter how we look at individual parcels or areas. So if we keep our focus on that, whatever the proposed use is, it needs to be compatible with the surrounding part of it. My only fear there is we're essentially saying to anybody who would like to acquire the Regal Plastic property for the continued operation of an industrial nature, we don't really want to see that.
But I think
that's really what we're saying.
Well, I think
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think
that's what this says.
Okay.
Well, it might, but I mean, that's what we're talking about.
The current draft, I think, is much more sensitive to that, kind of what Sir Jane was saying in terms of we recognize this is a good use, it's a viable use, and it's compatible currently, like Julio was saying as well. So we're really trying to couch it in those terms that we think this is good for now, but at some point, as conditions change, there may be a higher and better use for that site. Those of you who may remember the discussion that went on when the election came through, and Julio remembers well, it was, what's appropriate, and do we want to lose this industrial zoning, not only just for the issues in terms of what that means, but in terms of having places for certain uses, but also it's an employment base. It's a certain type of use that people have had, and what happened was the owners came back and said, we've really tried to market this for industrial, and there just isn't a market out there at this point. We see a market for other uses and for residential particularly. So those things they're in flux all the time.
The actual biggest reason why it wasn't able to go industrial was because of the cost of the cleanup, that they had to clean up the land.
Right.
That when they did all the cleanup on the land, they priced themselves right out of the industrial market, and the only way that they could actually put a building in there that was going to be of any use would be to put in the heavy residential area.
Yeah, correct.
So, clarification?
Hang on just a sec. Let me ask that somebody perhaps make a motion or somebody propose something that gives the staff direction as far as what you would like to see in the comprehensive plan regarding this area. Then we can kind of have a straw poll, yes or no, and we can work out something that gives them direction. So let me deposit that. You guys can be thinking about it and writing out your whereases and so on. And
in order to do that, I need to ask a question for clarification. Okay, if the owner wants to change it, meaning change the zoning,
right.
Okay, it has to change to a zoning category. It's not going to change to residential mixed use. We're saying it would change to central area, CA. Okay, at which point virtually anything goes. If they wanted to come in and put a community/service/retail center that would serve Alexan and draw people in for activities or that sort of thing, we could do that too. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to go to residential. Okay. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Follow-up question. What's the underlying zoning for the Alexan site? It's a PUD. But isn't there an underlying?
No, it's CA. Basically,
oh, it is
with
CA.
the PDR on it.
PDR.
Yeah, so, PDR.
Pavlos.
So I
PDR.
move
PDR,
that
yeah.
that staff is instructed,
No, it's not, it's PDR, I think, yeah, sorry.
I think it's just PDR, that staff is instructed to write a section for the current industrial district that permits it to stay as industrial district indefinitely, and that in the event that a rezoning application for that parcel comes in front of the planning commission, the planning commission will consider it being rezoned as a planned development that is compatible with the adjacent uses.
That's almost a little bit too vague. I'm sorry.
Well, and that's why I'm putting it out as a point of debate.
No, I agree.
So, and just as a point of clarification, effectively, the wording that we have in the question in front of us is there, but instead of, as Dave said, it has to be the same as the surrounding district residential mixed use, which doesn't, A, exist, and B, is only part of it, is to use the broader compatible with adjacent use and using planned development as the instrument. So that's my motion. If there is no second, then it's a moot point.
Well, I'll second it for discussion, but if it's too vague, throw in some specificity.
Well, I was just thinking that, harmonious to the area is the only part that I have a big hiccup on. I didn't have any issues with everything else that you said. That's why when I was talking earlier, I gave it a couple of options, where I really thought specifically it could go into a multifamily type of use, or it could go into another governmental use, and not thinking 5-10 years in advance. That's probably the limitation I'm going to leave it with, speaking from today. There might be something different in the future that we just haven't thought of yet. That's the only reason why I say it. Something a little bit more specific. And I guess my other concern is, as you were talking about the CA, we have blanketed the CA all over the place down here. And in a way, that kind of bothers me to some degree too, because doesn't give the level of flexibility. It gives a lot of flexibility,
Right.
but also in a negative way as well as in a positive way, and I guess I'm a little bit concerned about that.
Even from a market standpoint, I think sometimes it's better to have a smaller area where you can really focus your.
And I'm not, that's why I didn't specify CA in my motion. I'm saying using planned development
And I agree with you. Planned development is better
as the instrument. To some extent, I don't want to limit it just to residential and government, but a multifamily residential with mixed use or government as being the three.
Why not?
What does that leave out?
Single family.
A park.
Well, not necessarily if they're trying to win points by putting the green stuff in
Well, they're
in
required.
compliance with our new comp plan.
They're required to have a certain amount of open space, but the whole thing turning into a park or a church probably, anyway.
Is there
What
any
makes me
use that
nervous
we
about
want
the
to?
PD thing is, PD has not had a great reputation around this community for the last 6 years. It's supposed to be a give and take, encourage innovation. It's always been a take, in my estimation, from the developer. We give up things, we don't get much back. So I get nervous about a
We just need better
PD.
negotiators.
Yeah, exactly. I get nervous about leaving it up to a PD saying, okay, we've done our job. As you rightly say is a risk with just a CA, it's wide open. So I'm thinking we're not there yet. We need to figure out how we want to try and define this. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is enough just to say it needs to be compatible to, related to something, the surrounding properties as far as buffering and transition and protection. And I don't know how we put all that into a nice succinct statement.
Well, maybe we can go around and say, what is it we don't want to see there? Because if we're willing to leave it as industrial, there's a lot of stuff that can happen industrial. What is it we don't want to see there? And specify that. We don't want to see X. Or what is it that if it gets redeveloped, we do want to see there?
Supposedly, there are protections in with the I-2 zoning requirements that do provide protection for places like Alexian or whatever kind of retail commercial goes in on the property right next to Santa Fe. Right. So to a certain extent, you have to trust to your zoning, or if you find there are flaws in the zoning, you need to tinker with it to provide the kind of protections we're looking for. I guess I'm not offering a clear option because I don't see one. I think if we blithely assume that recommending CA or a PD is going to solve our problems or avoid some kind of a conflict, we're not there.
Well, let me take it then a step further, and let's throw that out as an idea. That the only two uses that we would want for that area, if it gets rezoned, would be multifamily residential or government. No commercial. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but an argument that can be made for not permitting commercial there, doing a PDR only, would be that we don't want to create another commercial center that would serve that residential area around there that would draw away from downtown.
Well, let me be devil's advocate. What we've been hearing from Chris Gibbons forever, because we keep raising the question, is what would it take in the way of increased density downtown, a density that most people here seem to find intolerable. What would it take in the way of density around that area to encourage the development of residential-focused commercial? Because it's not going to happen downtown, not with the constraints that we're putting on things with density and historic preservation and that sort of thing. So we're saying if somebody came in and wanted to put a little shop aimed at the residences around there, we're going to say no?
Well, that's why I'm throwing it out in terms of coming in. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have my zoning book. I know a couple of you do. I believe B1 is, as a zoning area, is one that specifically says businesses that are serving their immediate neighborhood. Correct? You see where I'm going is that if we say,
I guess the thing about this site, and if you start talking about what uses might go there, it's got the same constraints that Lexington had in terms of access and visibility. Access is really pretty limited when you're looking at a commercial site. If you're looking at retail, at least, you really have to come in off of Rio Grande, which will probably never have a full intersection, a signalized intersection, as it meets Santa Fe. So you've got pretty limited access. It's tough to get off of Prince onto this property. You have to come up. It's really tough. So I think Lexington faced that when they looked at what are the uses that work on this site, and I think we'll face it even more with this site. Lexington had the advantage of at least visibility.
I'll give you for instance, since you've mentioned the inaccessibility from around most of the site. But if a planned development includes retail elements of the B1 nature that are neighborhood or residential oriented, given the number of units up at Alexian and the traffic we're expecting down Rio Grande to the light rail station, I would think that a developer might find it very attractive to do some kind of multifamily residential on most of the site with some sort of a convenience store drop-off residential oriented business along Rio Grande. Now, the problem is it's a limited market. Even if you put another 150 units on there, you might be able to do that. That's still only 500 rooftops to support a private 7-Eleven, something like that. It may still be marginal, unless some day comes where Arapahoe County pulls out the rest of its facilities. Any insider information on that? Yeah. And then that property also becomes open for further residential development. Then you could start building up the densities that would support that. I'm throwing out possibilities and saying that even though right now it looks like there are too many constraints as far as visibility, it could be a possibility down the road. So to rule it out would seem to be a bit premature, talking about sustainability and keeping options open.
Since staff posed the question, let me drag it back this way, sort of what you said before, David. Taking what Pavlos suggested, how would you change that to make it applicable to a developer? Or can we take what he suggested, which is basically continue to permit industrial, when and if it's rezoned, the comprehensive plan, the city, would prefer something occur via plan development compatible with the area with a focus on PDR or government use. I think that's kind of where we're at. If you've thrown out some ideas, what can you add to his statement that makes it applicable to a developer? I
think I'd do more in taking things away. PDR is restrictive. It's saying residential.
Yeah.
Government is restrictive. It's saying government. And we're not saying that. We're saying we can conceive a variety of scenarios where some mix of multifamily residential, because I think we're all pretty clear, nobody's going to build single-family homes there.
Probably not.
But some mix of multifamily residential and a residential-oriented, business mix could succeed there, could become attractive as things change, and there's no reason not to encourage that sort of thing.
So you want to take government out of the equation? It can stay industrial. It will use the PD process to go to multi-family and supporting retail? Is that?
Actually, I'm still struggling to catch up to the first step, which is, why do we need to treat this any different from any other property that somebody might come in and say, I no longer want to use it as industrial, but I think I could put in X for rezoning. And at that point, the rezoning application gets reviewed by staff. It gets reviewed by the Planning Commission. City Council has ultimate approval authority. So why are we treating this one specifically differently?
Because it's the only industrial area in the central or the downtown area, and the comp plan can give it guidance.
Julio.
To kind of maybe my way of coming to closure on this might be a totally different outlook. The recommendation from us would be that if, and I use this industrial area as the example now, say we got a zoning change and it came through, and in order for the zone change, and say it was to, I don't know, think of something obnoxious.
A regional adult bookstore
There
center.
you go. I don't care. Anyway, that being the case,
Sorry, Suzanne.
say that was there, and for some reason, it got approved. Now, based on that approval, that would be an automatic amendment to the comp plan to change it to wherever it's going to go, because the city council at that time, you know what I'm saying, Dennis? That's an easier way to cover all this crap.
Yeah.
And so we can get through it a lot easier, because anytime you come in and the city council agrees to it, that's an automatic amendment. And therefore, if it turns out to be a bookstore, or as Ted Bunning would say, a nudie bar, that would be the way to go.
And unfortunately,
That's
talking about residential, multifamily residential or residential-oriented businesses, Suzanne, you want to argue in front of the court the definition of an adult bookstore is or is not a residential-oriented business?
I think that one's an easy one.
Oh, it is?
So, yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I'd find it entertaining. I don't think I'd call it a slam dunk.
That it's not compatible with the residential, I think you could, under the definition of adult bookstore.
Okay.
I think the issue is whether Crystal's was actually an adult bookstore. That was part of it.
Oh, we don't
too.
want to go there.
Yeah.
Not tonight. I was asking the question to try and make us think in more concrete terms. How far, what we say is going to either push a particular development, or it's going to rule out or steer people away from a particular development. I just want us to be clear in our wording what we are ruling out or sweeping into it.
Is there anything we want to rule out? Is there anything that we want to rule out? My understanding is that, adult-oriented establishments are permitted in the industrial zoning already, so if we're saying we're perfectly...
Save us an hour of conversation on this, please.
Drop the bookstore?
Yeah.
Okay, drop the bookstore.
But
Figured I never said it.
The idea, the question that I asked is, if we're okay with it remaining industrial indefinitely, is there any use, if it comes in for any kind of a rezoning, do we want to define from now any parameters in the comp plan? Because in rezoning, there are those three criteria, right? If something is going to get rezoned, and one of them is compatibility with the comp plan. That's, the question of why are we having this discussion is because of that. Do we want to say what the comp plan says is compatible and useful there?
So I don't think I'm hearing any opposition to either multifamily residential or residential-oriented business or compatible business, B1 or some expanded definition. The real question then becomes government. And I'm going to pose two different scenarios. If we say not government and Arapahoe County comes in and says, hey, this property is available, we think we need to expand our facility in Littleton, and we say, sorry, our comp plan says you can't do that.
They'll go ahead and buy it anyway.
Thanks, Julio.
That's
scenario 3.
But see, that's back to Julio's point, which has been a point that I have wanted to get back to for a couple of years now, which is, a lot of cities have the process set up where when you come in, if you are trying to zone contrary to comp plan, you come in first with those two tracks running in tandem. You have your legislative amendment to the comp plan while you're doing your rezoning. First, the comp plan gets amended, then the rezoning hearing happens. And those can happen on the same night. Right. But in that way, you never zone against your comp plan. You don't have to worry about changing conditions. You don't have to have these criteria that don't really have defined terms. What you do is you come in and say, with my zoning application, I have a comp plan amendment proposal.
It may smack a little bit as maybe not anti-democratic, but certainly anti-populist in terms of you're cramming something through all at once. You give the community no time, insufficient time to really respond.
You could set it up in your plan so that you did one night and one the next night. There's no magic to it. I'm just saying that a lot of places do that, and then you don't have this situation where...
You're saying there are technical ways to make this flow.
Well, it just, the problem we have in Littleton is we have a pretty outdated comp plan, and anytime somebody wants to come in, they have to argue changing conditions. Instead of making that changing conditions argument, which really does not have very good criteria to it, you would instead run into the situation where you were doing a comp plan amendment and you could consider compatibility and all the comp plan elements, and then the community could come in and comment on the legislative change. I suppose you could do that prior to the zoning change. And it really sets it up so you have two opportunities to comment, one on the legislative broad issue of, and then beyond that, the specific land use issue. But, it is a different way of doing it that a lot of people do, and so I just don't want to lose that point, because if you made a recommendation that we process applications that way, then maybe you wouldn't have to think in terms of, well, what if Arapahoe County came in? And then what would we do, because our comp plan would be outdated, and we want to... it's so hard to plan for every possible contingency, and that's what you all are doing at the table. You wouldn't have to do that if you...
If Arapahoe County came in, for example, wanted to expand their existing property into that property, they'd still have to go through probably a PDO of some sort.
Right.
Okay. At that point, we'd have the same staff, and we in City Council would have the same options as far as ensuring separation, buffering, transition, protection from Alexand or the commercial area. So nothing's changed in that regard. The protections that we build into zoning and comp plan are still there. So I guess what it's saying is we're identifying that as an area of potential change, which was one of the charges we had from City Council 3 years ago. And we're trying to give a concise definition of what we think would be compatible for an infill in that area.
I'm glad that you brought up Zen, because it's something that I've been thinking too. I mean, and it has come up several times, and I think it is worth considering whether we want to put it through without the comp plan right now. This thing of how does the comp plan get amended? It does offer certain advantages. I want to make sure that while we should have some process through which the comp plan can be amended, and as a question that's come up in the past, and I think Jim's brought in as well, that a comp plan can be amended by an applicant, the process can be initiated by an applicant, that it doesn't have to be initiated only by council or by us. But at the same time, we should have some criteria under what that happens. Otherwise, what we're saying is, you want to do something that the comp plan doesn't allow? Not a problem. You just have to do two things. And we will make a comp plan that could end up being completely meaningless, because anybody can come in and say, oh, well, I think this should happen. Let's amend the comp plan. And it becomes this complete piecemeal. So, yes, let's make it possible to amend the comp plan, but let's also not make it so easy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you have to have specific criteria in terms of how you do this, and what are you looking at, what do you evaluate in order to do it, and what's the process, and just outline the process.
We could have that as a separate agenda item for a future meeting. We don't need to.
I like to go a separate route. I think we've given enough.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
Let them come back.
So let them come up with it, and then we can worry about the details later.
Sure.
Can I read something on the PDR and PDC right now on 10.223C1 and 2, for those of you who want to follow it. PDR says single-family dwelling units, multiple-family dwelling units, any combination of the above, and non-residential uses, including but not limited to churches, schools, or recreational facilities. It would seem to me that if Arapahoe County, or the city of Littleton for that matter, wanted to come into that area, it would fall under that PDR. And PDC says, paragraph A is any land uses allowed in the B1 and B2 business districts. But paragraph B says multiple uses within one or more structures, including multiple family, residential, and office, and retail uses permitted in the B1 and B2. I would want to see whether there's any way in which we said we permit PDR or PDC, but restrict it to uses permitted in the B1.
Yeah, and I don't know for our purposes if we need to get specific in terms of what zone districts, as much as use, I think, in terms of kind of general, multifamily residential, commercial, governmental, and then that's something you hash out, I think, when you get to the actual application. And by then, the zone districts themselves may have changed. I mean, probably to incorporate that in the plan, I think may be a problem on our part. So I think just in terms of what do you think is appropriate for that area, or do you want to step back and even just say compatible with the surrounding uses or adjacent uses, get back at that level even. But I think just some direction in terms of is it something the city should even entertain, don't entertain it, and kind of general parameters for what you're looking for. So I think it's our responsibility to give some direction for that.
Yeah,
Steve?
Can we work ourselves back to the question on the table? Because we're way off of that now. Do you just want to call a question?
We've kind of wandered. Sure, I think that's reasonable. We've got something there.
There's enough there.
Yeah.
There is a motion that was seconded for purposes of discussion. And
let me try to restate where we are. Permits industrial indefinitely. Rezoning would be rezoned as a PDR or PDO. Did we take that out? Rezoning, all right. I'm working from two sets of notes. Let's see. Rezone as something via plan development compatible with the area with a focus toward multifamily residential. Is that,
And supporting
and, that's right, and we took out government and added supporting retail, or residential supporting retail type of businesses. Now, I've stumbled through that. Okay, permits industrial indefinitely. A rezone we would look for a rezone using the PD process that delivered something compatible with the area, focused on multifamily residential and retail associated with the residential. Is that basically what we've got in front of us?
I think since this is instruction that we're giving to staff to go in and bring us back exact wording upon which we'll take a decision, because that wasn't really my motion, but I think if staff feels comfortable from the discussion that they have enough to come back with something, and then we can argue on real wording rather than argue on whether we should argue about arguing.
Okay. We'll listen to it again.
All right. All those that like that for direction to staff, how about a show of hands? We've got pretty much everybody.
I'm going to make one little quibble.
Sure.
Does it really make sense to say we're going to keep it indefinitely until we decide to change it? I mean, that sounds a little silly.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, we keep it until we're going to change it. That's a given. It is what it is until somebody comes forward with a proposal for change.
The difference for it is that we're not calling for it to change. I think that's what the word indefinitely means.
Instead of saying indefinitely until we change it, why don't we say when a proposal comes through for a changed use, we're going to consider it to be the multifamily.
Yeah, we will stay industrial, and if a proposal comes, that's what we're looking for in terms of change.
Something along that line. Steve?
Dennis, what's the height limit on Alexon?
I think it's 42. Does that sound right?
Essentially the same as Nevada Place?
I thought it was 40.
Yeah.
I thought it was somewhere in the 40s.
I think it's in the 40s someplace, yeah. It's got flat roofs, and it's not, they're not.
It's a three-story flat roof.
Three-story flat roof with high ceilings. It's new construction, so it's high.
It's essentially the same as Nevada Place.
Yeah.
One of the things that occurred to me, and I pulled the map out, the Littleton City Service Center on the other side of the railroad depression, or whatever we call it these days, is almost, if not extends to the southern limit of that industrial area that's on the west side of the track. And so I'll pose it this way. With that being on the east side, would a higher limit for the height of development there be acceptable?
I would say no, because it's on the top of the hill overlooking Santa Fe. That was one of the things that we did with the Planning Commission on the Alexon site, on limiting the height then, because it was already on the top of the hill overlooking Santa Fe.
So it's the view from Santa Fe up.
Yeah, because
also.
You're magnifying the height from Santa Fe and Bellevue looking up at that site. So
Okay.
that's where my question came from, asking on what the height limit of Alexon was.
Okay.
Maybe this would be a good time to ask ourselves the central question. What is it that leads us to consider height limitations? What factors? Why consider height limitations? We've talked about iconic views in some areas. We've talked about, well, that's the main one I can think of. We've skirted around the question of solar access. We've talked repeatedly about buffering or putting a separation between a really high building and a really low building, especially residential. Other than that, what's to give us some kind of defined definition of height limitation other than being arbitrary? 40 feet, 60 feet.
Well,
what are we striving for here?
The area south, I think we looked at them sort of stepping up and down so that you didn't have a disjoint 70-foot height, whatever riverfront senior living is significant compared to its neighbors. And so Sarah whispered in my ear, compatible with the small town environment, which is kind of what we're looking at downtown. We want to keep that character, so a no height restriction at all, I think, could very easily be incompatible.
Let me paraphrase, let me remind everybody, I am not saying no height limits at all. I'm just saying, is there some finite, some objective standard or criteria we can establish for what's driving us to set heights, rather than just coming off as arbitrary?
What's adjacent, I think, has been something that we've considered, not having 6 stories looking into your backyard, that kind of thing. Pavlos, was that?
Julio's.
Julio.
I think from my standpoint, you know, and I don't know if everybody agrees with this, but I kind of, from my standpoint, I've always looked at the fact of what was downtown along Main Street, you know, and I can't tell you what that number is, but for conversation, say it's around 40 feet. I've kind of always kept that in the back of my mind as something I don't want to see go higher than that anywhere else in this area. I really feel strongly about that, only because I don't want to see these towering monoliths of structures out from the downtown area that, you know, I think the biggest structure we have in the sidebar, the biggest structure we have probably in the downtown area is ACC. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly what that is either, but I think it's higher than 40 feet. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, but that's probably the exception to the rule. I wasn't around when that was created, but I don't think I'd like to see more of that.
On the other hand, there's a fairly large separation between that and the rest of the downtown.
I understand, but it's still part of our downtown.
It kind of goes back to Steve's point, looking at it from Santa Fe looking up. Yeah. If it's going to dominate the landscape, maybe that's the reason for the height limitation. It was good in the past, and makes sense to me. So back to the
question. So essentially setting an upper limit is a question of character.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what we've been saying, it's just we haven't put it into so many words.
So, well, and a recommendation to the staff for this area as far as an upper limit.
The height page that has been circulated to us, which is the draft from the 1st of March of last year, already has 50 feet for that whole general area.
Below crest line.
Yeah.
That's this upper.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, sorry. Doesn't include. I think we have 50 feet as the highest on everything, and I would just say extend that to the north if we're going to keep that to 50 feet. I think some of those heights need to be reevaluated. I want to specifically point out that for the R5 area, we have out of this 35 feet where we've heard fairly definitively from the neighbors who attended that meeting that they wanted 30.
And that's what it is now. It is 30.
Yes, so I'm just saying that I just kind of want to clear this is something that was being discussed then. But another thing that I want to point out is not just character in the whole discussion, and especially when we had that big, a lot of drawings that show the buildings that we walked around with, and we looked at also the natural terrain of the area that is not just east-west, but is also north-south. This is not a just absolutely flat area. We talked about the fact that the courthouse, which while technically outside of the study area is a part of downtown, and the old mill being buildings that we wanted to remain as fairly strong, and those would stay as the tallest buildings. I mean, I do remember us talking about the old mill and the courthouse wanting to be by far not just nothing taller than that. We wanted those to be the tallest structures in the area. So that's another part of the character. It's not just broadly character, but it is discussing about those buildings itself.
Linda?
I second Julio's suggestion for 40 feet.
I didn't know it was a motion, but it's okay. It is now.
Do we know what the height of the Arapahoe County building is?
No.
Even close? Didn't we have an application for a modification 6 months ago?
We did, but we didn't have a height with it, no.
Let's,
I would think it's 30.
3 stories.
30, yeah, 35, 40, maybe? Higher, you think?
No,
It's only
I don't think so.
Well, no, it's 3, but one of them's built.
Part of it's
and
underground.
On the east side, it's underground. The
It's
first
a
story is-
walkout basement, but that's about it.
They're tall stories, you're right.
Right.
let me suggest an amendment that the 40 is good. My amendment is that after researching the Alexon property, that you let us know what that height is exactly before a final decision.
Or Lexington and Arapahoe County.
Well, yeah.
We don't know,
Yeah.
there's always a possibility.
Actually, yeah, I could excuse myself and go look for
Yeah,
Alexa now.
Let's
Well, there
let's
is-
put it off.
I feel there is a difference between Alexa and Arapahoe County, because Arapahoe County is not at the top of the hill.
Yeah.
Arapahoe County is down even with the building that we're in now. Alexon is going uphill.
True.
So with a bit more information, not just Alexon, the
Context is really what we're saying.
Sure. So is that, let's offer that as direction. How about a straw poll for 40 feet with further information and a final direction based on that? Looks like we got everybody. We left some wiggle room. That's the second of these 5 easy questions.
Why do you do this to us?
According to the
You think you'd know better.
to the agenda, we were going to move on at this point. We had 10 minutes of wiggle room at the end, which let's go on and try to get at least one more question here. All right. Third one is, while complying with the height limits, do we want to describe relative density for housing in downtown? And there's 3 categories: lowest density for the old downtown neighborhood, medium for midtown, and highest for Main Street district south of
I make a
Alamo.
motion no.
Okay,
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Hey,
okay. So
we're halfway there.
what we're going to vote on very shortly here is whether we want to describe the relative density. And is there some discussion? Anyone want to offer a suggestion that we do want to have an extended discussion, a short discussion?
Short.
Short.
How about a legal question?
Sure.
How can we do that with all that area zoned as CA?
The design guidelines, pretty much.
To the design.
Back to saying, the right hand saying one thing, but then dig deeper and it says something else again. Okay. So much for clarity.
That's why I said no.
So you can correct that through design guidelines, but not the comp plan?
Right, the comp plan would give guidance for it, but you'd actually have to have it adopted by city council to get that in place. And currently, the zoning provides a height limit that's allowed to be amended through the PDO process. So as you're going through the PDO process, you can actually go through and say, here's what I think is more appropriate height. So there's a height. So that's how we've got higher structures downtown.
20 years later.
Is through that process where they think it's appropriate to give an additional height. So what we were doing with the height map was saying, okay, this is something we'll be incorporating in the design standards and guidelines in terms of this is what we'd be seeing as a cap on those PD zones as they come through. So
I heard,
Jenny, I talked over Jenny's hands.
I was going to say, I heard agreement for a short discussion. Let me go to Jenny, since this apparently came as a comment from her.
I was just looking at how, when I look at this, trying to describe the density might be helpful to those looking at the area, to just, as an overview. I mean, there's a very different feel in the old downtown neighborhood than there is, and when you get into our more midtown versus what we're talking about in the Main Street district. So I just saw it as more of maybe a helpful detail to describe what we've been discussing, but.
And our understanding was it wouldn't change the height, so you'd have the same height, but what you're saying is you're going to have, with the highest, the area south of Alamo, for example, you'd have more intensity, you'd have more activity, you'd have maybe smaller units, maybe greater site coverage to get that higher density within that capped height. Whereas in the Midtown District, you might have more open space, you might have greater setbacks. There's just a different way to achieve that, maybe larger units, a different type of unit. So that has a lower density relative to the area south, and then the lowest would be in the R5 area, the old downtown neighborhoods. What our interpretation was, kind of where Jenny was thinking. So we saw some usefulness in it, but we wanted to come back and
Then my question that I don't understand is, say, because Midtown has been established, at least in this framework, what kind of densities were you thinking about, based upon that are existing, or whatever? I mean, I guess that's the big question.
Where this came from is, as we were going over the tape, what we try to do is make sure that anything that the commission has brought up doesn't get dropped. And this was something that Jenny brought up.
I agree.
And all we want to do is make sure that it gets addressed. You can throw it out, you can add to it, whatever. But if we leave it hanging, then Jenny's going to come back and beat us up 3 weeks later.
Well, the comment that I have with that is, once we establish the height of this thing, then I think we can figure out or have an idea, because in the realm of consistency with Midtown, in existing zoning applications that we've had for the senior center and, Nevada Place and whatever else is out there, that's been kind of like on the upper end or the higher end of the density per se, as we've seen it based upon the lots sizes. And I think that in and of itself is establishing a range or.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with what this concept is that Nevada Place, those are fairly large units, whereas, so the overall density, that's the same kind of site coverage. If you were to build a project south of Alamo, in an area that has a more industrial character than design standards and guidelines, and you could get smaller units than those, you could get not the same deep setbacks, you could have smaller outdoor space. There are different ways to accommodate that to get a little bit more density.
But the whole time you're saying, you're not bringing out a specific density.
No, we're not.
And I think that's very interesting. And I think that if, again, I will toss it to you kind of come up with a little bit of what you're along those same lines, because I think that's what I'm hearing Dennis say is very doable and possible.
Let me recap for a second what I heard. The first answer was, no, we don't want to describe that.
I'm still on the no side, but.
Then it arose, how would we do that? Dennis said through design guidelines. It occurs to me at that point, that's not the comprehensive plan because that's too detailed.
Right.
Design guidelines are closer than the 30,000 level. So I'm still kind of with the no, we don't want to describe that. Pavlos.
So while design guidelines are one of the instruments that we can use for the implementation, and therefore outside, I think within the comp plan we can, what I'd like to see, I'm more of on the yes, but, and my but is twofold. One is I'd like to see lowest, medium, and highest doesn't mean very much. I'd like to see a lowest meaning less than however many DUs per acre. Medium being a certain range from this to this, and highest being from medium to, again, putting in some kind of an upper limit. And I see that as useful because that is a way in which we can address some of the density concerns that have been raised by us as well as by citizens and residents on the old downtown neighborhood, and a way of restricting down what R5 permits, but without going through the whole rezoning. So that's one suggestion that I have. The second one is that we're still leaving a very large area of the study area outside that is not defined within those three, which is the Alexian station and all that area that we're talking up in the north. And I'm actually curious as to whether that should fall under Midtown, or whether it should fall like medium, or it should fall under highest. I'm almost inclined to put that into highest.
Yeah, I would think it would be.
Let me offer this at this point.
The area north and south.
Briefly?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's our rationale for north-south? What are we drawing arbitrary lines, or is there something driving higher or lower density? Is there something about what's adjacent to the area or what that area is adjacent to? Or are we just looking, oh, we already have outlines of areas on the map, let's just say that we're going to vary the height? Why? Does 45 to 50, 40 to 45 make that much difference?
I think where we've been to date is, I think we've been pretty consistent with what the design standards and guidelines say, even though we've changed the boundaries a little bit.
Are we worried about being consistent with design standards and guidelines, which are supposed to serve zoning, which are supposed to serve the comp plan?
Well, if we agree with them, yeah. And what I've heard so far, when I've heard discussions of character for different areas, the area south of Alamo, the area north of Main Street, I've heard discussions pretty consistent with what the design standards and guidelines call out in terms of existing character and desired character, in terms of the area north having a more residential feel, the area to the south having more industrial feel. And when we've talked about height, we've been having...
Once and for all, I'm going to make a statement.
Okay.
I know that Littleton downtown design standards and guidelines keep making this reference to new development south of Alamo should reflect the industrial history. I don't give a damn about the industrial history. 25 years from now, when there are no more warehouses or industrial, nobody else is going to care. That's like the fact that the first cars were called horseless carriages for a reason, because they designed them to look exactly like carriages without horses. Okay, we don't need to be constrained by that. I understand what Steve was, and Steve led the discussion on the height variation, and he made a good case for building up, building down, and that sort of thing, where the land was relatively flat. But we're now talking about density, and my question is, what is our rationale for distributing density? Are we trying to put the density more around the light rail station, which is what the light rail station and system was supposed to be for in the first place? Or are we just doing it arbitrarily? I'm looking for a rationale.
Hang on. Okay. I think you guys have wandered into the weeds as far as I'm concerned. I see a fairly basic choice where we started this discussion. We're going to wrap it up right now. Julio suggested, no, we don't want to describe relative density. Pavlos said, yes, we do want to describe it, but we want some definitions as to what that means. So each commissioner, you have one vote. We're going to vote no, we aren't going to define it in the comprehensive plan. Or yes, have staff come back. We want some kind of definition, but we need to know what they mean by these relative densities and perhaps move it to other areas. Okay, so I'm going to call the question on this because we're getting way out of hand. So all those that say, no, we do not want to describe relative density in the comprehensive plan directly, and it is a function more of guidelines, show your hands. We've got 4. I am voting as well as indicating how I want you to vote. On the other side of it,
I think since we had a motion on the floor for no, and that's by 5 votes, that carried.
okay,
I mean, as much as I disagree with it. Huh?
it was actually 4 votes.
5.
Oh, 5?
That's fine, wasn't it?
1,
2, 4,
3. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Remember, right now, we're living with CA, which has a uniform maximum of 100 units per acre.
Yep.
So in this case, not doing something has done something.
Well,
it is said density throughout will be 100 units per acre.
Right.
The question before us was, do we want to describe it?
I just want us to understand the consequences of what we did. We were by declining to choose, we chose.
Of course.
I think the rest of us are aware of it, and as much as I disagree with that decision, I trust that commissioners are aware of the consequences of their votes.
All right, we have a couple more items, and we're going to jump to those. I will suggest that if you want to bring the last 2 questions back, the last 2 easy questions, before we get to hard questions, then that would be next time. I think you told me
With good reason.
Someone said these are easy. All right. Next item is the status of the draft plan. You guys have been editing. We've had comments about various things, and we answered a lot of questions last time. So, status.
Good. We have been working again, and we're going to work again on Wednesday and again on Friday to incorporate the comments you've gotten and to amend it accordingly and to make everything work together. As you know, it's kind of this major puzzle. We're working right now making sure that we've got a goal and a policy and an implementation strategy that all fit up. Everything is covered. We're thinking currently about making some just organizational changes in terms of how does it really read, how does it function, so that we might actually line up the policy and the implementation strategies so that they're more clearly aligned and you can really go back and forth and more readily and kind of see how they relate to one another. We're going to toy with that a little bit and just see how it works and what's more reasonable. But we have another meeting on the February 14th currently. We want to talk about that later to dates. Does that make sense to people? But our intent is
Why don't you just talk about it now and get it over with?
Okay, February 14th is Valentine's Day, in case you've all forgotten. I don't know how many people think that that's an appropriate place to be on Valentine's Day, but your significant others.
Monday night?
Monday night, yeah.
Where we don't want to feel the love.
Can we bring a date?
There you go.
So I want to see if people want to meet on Monday, Valentine's Day, or if you feel like it's against your best interest to meet that night, maybe meet another night. So,
Let me ask, what's the prospect of having a regular meeting necessary, a regular business?
I think very slim, actually.
Slim,
Yeah.
okay. So then the possibility is probably there that we can just reschedule without too much difficulty. Pavlos?
Considering the amount of work that we've got and I think the timeline that we're trying to work on, I would actually like to propose that we put in one extra meeting in February.
7th or the 21st?
21st?
The 7th or the 21st, and if we wish to not meet on the 14th, that we then meet the 7th, the 21st, and the 28th.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I mean,
Not 7th or 21st, 7th and 21st.
If we don't meet
if we don't
meet the 14th, then both the 7th and the 21st and the 28th. But I think that trying to put in an extra meeting in February at this point is it's a good idea. We're trying to move.
Subject to availability of the room and
Right, all that
broadcast.
stuff broadcasted, yeah.
With that stipulation, all those that favor those 3 meetings, how about a show of hands? I think I
Do
think
you have no romantic love life? Is that what
if we get our work done in the first 2, say the 7th and the 21st, we could always decide that the last was not necessary. If a hearing becomes necessary, we may decide. But for now, subject to availability of the room, looks like that's I think it was perhaps 6 in favor.
And like I said, if people want to meet the 7th and the 14th and the 28th, or the 14th and the 21st, I'm not necessarily proposing that we take out the 14th. My proposal is that we have 3 meetings in February. So if someone wants to arrange different dates because they work better,
let us know about the availability of the room. That's a factor. Steve?
I'd like to check on the possibility of having some test cases with our comp plan that we're developing downtown to see on how useful the comprehensive plan that we're coming up with down there actually
have a
is.
proposal come through and see what we'd say about it. If it gives us enough direction, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think.
Will it play out the way we anticipate?
Yeah, or whether we're just giving everybody free rein to do whatever they want down there.
And we've got plenty of time now with an extra meeting scheduled. Linda?
And I was thinking of maybe going back and looking at Nevada Place and seeing how the differences between the old comp plan and the new comp plan, what differences those would make. Maybe Merle's too, just take a couple different scenarios and test it.
So we've kind of gone from status to next steps, scheduled some meetings, upcoming meetings. anything else there? We have an item, wrap up and schedule. I think we're kind of working on that.
We are, absolutely, yeah.
On status of draft plan, I wasn't here last time, so did we get a follow-up on comments received, ratings, and that sort of thing, the way we did with the first draft? Was that distributed? Because I didn't see anything.
No, we have not passed it out, actually. It's
Okay.
true, yeah, we do have it.
Because it doesn't do us much good to go through and to review this and make comments and suggestions, and we never hear anything back.
We will get that back to you.
Last time we had a hearing that was approximately half.
Yeah, I listened to it.
Fairly easy in the second half, just for anybody else watching that might not have gone back and reviewed. And then we answered a number of questions similar to these easy questions last time in the second half. So you're going to kill me, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
Upcoming meetings, it'll be a mercy killing. Upcoming meetings, tomorrow night, a special meeting, a study session, Littleton City Council, discussion of Denver water contract, staff analysis of library director position. Looks like a District 4 community meeting this coming Saturday, January 29th at the Carson Nature Center. Contact Ms. Brinkman for further information, and she did put out a email. Anything else?
I'm going to suggest we pick up on something that kind of got short shrift at the end of the last meeting.
Okay.
And that's this inference that the central area is the only section we're ever going to do. We're never going to do the other sections. We're never going to do a citywide. Therefore, this all has to be crammed into here. I, for one, find that abhorrent. It's totally rejecting every direction we were given from City Council. It's totally rejecting 2.5 years of work on our part. So I think we need to schedule that as a discussion item at the next meeting, so we know where we're going from here.
I think there was some suggestion that the Santa Fe corridor would be the next stage, and I thought that was agreed upon.
That's not the question that was posed last meeting.
Okay.
It was the inference that we're never going to produce anything more than the central area. Therefore, we have to cram every possible consideration that would normally be, for 2 years have been saying we'd go into the community-wide section. We've got to cram it into the central area.
Hang on just a second.
Where did that come from?
You.
Let me ask.
You.
Okay, tell me exactly what I said.
wait.
That's a very heavy accusation.
At 1 hour and 32 minutes into this, he asked me a
David.
question, and I'm telling him.
Please.
Go back and look at this.
David, please. This isn't going to be a discussion between the two of you. I want to pose a question about how many people felt that we left with that inference. If I have to put a motion on the table, I will. But I don't think we need to debate that back and forth. It's certainly not planning. So let's stop there. Let's do it this way. If there's support to bring it to the agenda next time, let me see a show of hands as to discussing the inference that this area is the end of the process. I didn't get that, but I haven't reviewed it. David watched it on tape, and perhaps that came out. I'll put it that way. So anybody that sees this as agenda item for the next meeting, let me see a hand. Okay. It doesn't look like we need to go that direction. But since you reviewed the tape, I think that probably answers your question about how everybody else feels. If you guys want to discuss it further, I would suggest email.
No, I just don't want to leave it out there as a ghost hanging over us, that's all.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other items?
Could we go back to the schedule real quick? So just if we have the 3 meetings in February, our goal is to when to...
Is to have a draft that we could actually then go out to public review and internal review. So that we'd like to get to that as soon as possible, of course. And we just, we feel like we're making major progress in terms of just responding to the comments you've made. We still have these major questions, but we're feeling much more comfortable, I think, with where we are with the draft. But again, we have to bring it back to you and see if we got it right. But we really think that we're close. So if we could kind of finalize these questions and get the answers to them.
Let me propose one more question. You had, on the questions to Planning Commission, these last two, number 4 was, should the city work with the private sector to finance amenities that enhance livabilities. This is, I think, probably a district type of proposal. And then the fifth one was dispersing cluster housing. Is that a goal, dispersing student housing, senior housing, subsidized housing? Let me have a show of hands. Do we want to have those two items as an agenda item next time, since we didn't get around to discussing them this time?
With a time limit.
With a time limit. So I've got one yes. Okay.
I don't think we should drop them.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to be sure. We can't, we did fairly well tonight. We have 10 minutes left. This is the appointed time according to your agenda. And
That's an easy question.
my last question is there a motion to adjourn?
You bet.
There's one. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner.